This is a once-in-a-lifetime offer of my recently published books in all formats. Please take advantage of these discounts by adding these books to your personal library, and be sure to share some of them with your friends and family. Thanks.
Huios is a compilation of 4 books written by Blake Higginbotham over the past 10 years. It is also a legacy message that will serve to help his sons discover the purpose for which they were born. Please note that this is a special edition book and it is available in all formats, including hardback, paperback, digital and audio. Enjoy! All of Blake's books can be purchased at booksbyblh.me or booksbyblh.xyz.
Hello, this is Blake Higginbotham with Home Family Gathering. You are cordially invited to join with us on our Saturday call. If you'll contact me from the website below and send me your contact information, I'll be more than happy to add you to the notification list. Again, this is Blake Higginbotham, and we are looking forward to connecting, communicating, corroborating, and collaborating with you. Have a blessed day. As usual, I'm sharing my screen with you, and I've been meditating this for quite some time and just recently began to write to it, and now I'm going to be sharing it with you on this call on Saturdays. But I've always thought that not only has the religion of Christianity become something other than the house that Yahshua is building, it's not an accurate representation of either the house that Yahshua is building or the Father's house, and it's certainly not an accurate representation of him. Matter of fact, I've always seen the term Christian as being a derogatory term that caught on, and we were never really able to shake that title. They began to call us Christians at Antioch, and it really was not a term that was supposed to tag us or a title that was supposed to name us. It was a derogatory term used to mark us for death and to mock us. And so the early was known as the followers of the way. Followers of the way, a life lived in Messiah. The identity of early Christians as followers of the way reflects the essence of the early church's mission, vision, and core identity. This title emphasized that Christianity was not a set of doctrines or adherence to rituals, but rather a transformative way of life modeled on the person and teaching of Yahshua Messiah. It signaled a faith journey that encompassed the totality of life, an ongoing path to reconciliation with Yahweh Elohim and participation in a new, inclusive community. The term followers of the way highlighted the dynamic and lived-out nature of the faith, providing early Christians with a distinctive social and spiritual identity that enabled them to thrive even in the face of persecution, expand their reach, and shape history. And I believe that we're living in a day and in an hour when we must return somewhat to our authentic apostolic roots. We must, in some ways, return to our core roots and understanding concerning the followers of the way. You're going to hear me using that term more and more rather than Christians. You're going to hear me using that term more and more rather than church. You're going to hear me using that term more and more. I'll be using the followers of the way and ecclesia. Followers of the way, I believe, is a more accurate expression to identify us with. And so I'm going to reach back to our roots. I'm going to reach back to our authentic apostolic roots and our authentic ecclesia, and we're going to begin to use followers of the way again. Amen? The way, a life model after Yahshua. When early Christians referred to themselves as followers of the way, they were pointing to the core of their faith, a commitment to walk in the footsteps of Yahshua Messiah. In John 14:6, Yahshua declares, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." This profound statement reflects that following Messiah is more than intellectual assent to a set of beliefs. It is an invitation to walk in a new direction, living in accordance with the character, teachings, and mission of Yahshua. So while it might not be directly related, when Yahshua made this statement, I am the way, the truth, and the life, it's indirectly related for sure, because he was making a very bold statement concerning who he was. The early Christians understood that Yahshua embodied the perfect way of living. He was the ultimate model for how to love, serve, and obey Yahweh Elohim. His teachings about forgiveness, humility, and radical love, particularly for one's enemies, were not just ethical guidelines, but were meant to be lived out daily. The way involved imitating Messiah in every aspect of life, reflecting his sacrificial love, compassion for the marginalized, and unwavering obedience to the will of the Father. Those are two things that we can certainly say he represented: the compassion for the marginalized and unwavering obedience to the will of the Father. Matter of fact, it's been said that he loved the will of the Father more than he did anything. And that's why he prayed, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me in the Garden of Gethsemane. He prayed, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me, but nevertheless, thy will be done. So he loved the will of the Father more than he loved us. He loved the will of the Father more than he loved life itself. He loved the will of the Father more than he did continuing to live in this world. But the will of the Father was something that he put above everything in his life. It's obvious because of the way that he not only lived, but the way that he died. This understanding of Christianity as a way of life rather than a set of rituals set early believers apart from other religious groups of that time, including the Jewish faith, which Christianity emerged, and the Roman religious practices that surrounded them. Christianity as the way was about transformation, shaping how early believers interacted with Yahweh Elohim, one another, and the world around them, all three being important. The path to reconciliation and community. Central to the identity of the followers of the way was the concept of reconciliation. Through Yahshua's life, death, and resurrection, early Christians believed that they were reconciled to Yahweh Elohim, restored from the alienation caused by sin. And this reconciliation was not just an individual experience, but the creation of a new community, a church, an ecclesia, where believers were united as one body in Messiah. The inclusivity of this community was radical, as it transcended the usual boundaries of ethnicity, social class, and gender. In Messiah, there is no Jew or Gentile. There is no slave or free. There is no male or female, for you are all one in Messiah Yahshua. That's found, of course, in Galatians 3, verse 28. This new community reflected a countercultural way of living. In other words, they represented something so radically removed from the Roman government and way of life, from that culture, and even from the religious culture, that they stood out. Some might say like a sore thumb. Others may say, it was so obvious that you couldn't miss them. But they represented a new community. It reflected a counterculture way of living. While the Roman Empire was highly satisfied and hierarchical, the early Christian community fostered an environment of equality and mutual care. In their gatherings, believers shared meals, prayed together, and cared for one another's needs. That's found, of course, in Acts 2, verses 44 through 47, and it describes how the early church lived. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold their property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. This communal, selfless way of life was part of what made the early Christian distinctive and attractive to others. I want you to hear me now when I say this. When I say counterculture, I'm not necessarily talking about just being weird or being cultish or being some kind of a commune that's separated from society. which I could name some examples of. I'm talking about being counterculture in the way. In other words, it's obvious that you represent something different than the world, different than the religious system, and it's something that, for the most part, those that have been marginalized and those that, like in many third world countries, they are governed by not only dictators, they're governed by religious leaders, especially in countries that are the majority is made up of Muslims or Hindus or another religion. Those that are not a part of the Muslim faith or the Hindu faith or the Buddhist faith, they are marginalized. So you can imagine how a counterculture and way of living would have been attractive. It would have been not only distinctive, but it would have been attractive. And so we're talking about a culture during the time of Rome, which was a republic similar to ours in this day and hour, but the Jews, the Hebrew people, were like the outcast. They were like the offscouring. They were peasants. If you can think about this, I can't give you the picture that I'm wanting to paint, because if you've never been to a foreign country or a third world country, you won't understand what I'm saying. But in India, there's tribal people, there's village people, and then there's city people. And most of the city people are the middle class or wealthy, and they're mostly Hindu. Well, there's some village people that are not Hindu, but most of them are mixed, just to get along, just to be able to buy and sell, just to be able to work, just to be able to live. And in the tribal villages, tribal communities, they have their own laws and they have their own way of doing things, and it can involve not only can it involve Hinduism, it can involve other religions as well as Christianity. So if you can understand that there's a caste system in India and in other countries, there's the upper class, the lower class, and the middle class, and there's these divisions that the early ecclesia did not have between Jew and Gentile, slave and free, and male and female, and thank Yahweh for it. And the marginalized were attracted to them. In other words, it wasn't so difficult to find people that needed help, and they didn't just become believers so that they could get help. But you understand that being in need is a good place to reach in the direction of the help that's being made available to you. And so certainly, as they became believers and they found themselves in need, and they found themselves under the jackboot of tyranny of the Roman government, and they found themselves outcasts, and they found themselves marginalized, they found fellowship, and they found family in this counterculture way of living called the followers of the way. So are you following me so far? The way, therefore, was not only about personal spiritual transformation, but also about creating a new social order that would reflect the values of Yahweh's kingdom. Early Christians lived in such a way that they embodied the reconciliation that Jesus had accomplished, not only between individuals and God, but also among people from diverse backgrounds and experiences. A distinctive identity in the midst of persecution. Now think about this. We have not been persecuted in the way that many followers of the way and ecclesia have been persecuted in other countries, not in the United States. The day may come that we will be. And let me share with you that while a lot of people think that, that the Roman government is the one that really crucified Christ, and so they should be held accountable, it was religion that crucified Christ using the instrument of government. So religion and politics ended up assassinating and executing an innocent man called Yahshua Messiah. And that was spoken to on the day of Pentecost by the Apostle Peter. The identity of early Christians and as followers of the way also equipped them to endure intense persecution and opposition. The Roman Empire viewed Christianity as a subversive movement that threatened the stability of Roman religion and social norms. I wonder if what we represent today at our best, I wonder if even those of us who understand that we are not going to be able to identify with the religion of Christianity, but we rather identify with the followers of the way, we're not going to be able to identify with what people call the church, but we identify as being part of the ecclesia in our locales and region. I wonder if we represent a subversive movement that threatens the stability of the United States of America and its social norms. And let me go ahead and say that we look far too much like the average American and far too much like the world to be a threat to their stability or anything else. We're certainly not subversive enough. And when I say subversive, I want you to know I'm not talking about becoming militant and hostile to government, anti-establishment, and Tarianism. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about as far as they're concerned, they see us as subversive. As far as they are concerned, they are threatened. Well, I want you to hear me when I say this. In the days ahead, we're going to be considered subversive, and we're going to be considered a threat to the religious system and the United States of America and social norms. They're going to wonder, what in the world? Early Christians refused to worship the emperor. Did you hear what I said? Early Christians refused to worship the emperor or participate in state-sponsored religious rituals. Practices were considered essential to maintaining loyalty to the empire. And as a result, they were often seen as a threat and subjected to violence and marginalization. Their identity as followers of the way gave them a sense of purpose and resilience, rooted in the example of Yahshua, who suffered for the sake of humanity. Early Christians saw persecution as a way of participating in the suffering of Messiah. As 1 Peter 4, verse 13 states, "But rejoice inasmuch as you participate in the sufferings of Messiah, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed." This understanding helped the early church maintain its identity and mission even under extreme conditions. Their distinctiveness was not limited to their refusal to engage in Roman religious practices. It was also evident that their radical love for one another and for their enemies. Listen, it was also evident in their radical love for one another and for their enemies. Christians were known for their acts of charity and care, particularly during times of crisis. I can say we're still doing a pretty good job in that arena. During plagues, for instance, they tended to the sick while others fled. This love, rooted in their understanding of Yahshua's teachings, became a powerful witness that drew others to the faith. I believe I'm going to stop right there today for two reasons. One, I don't want to start coughing. And two, I don't want to take you too far in this. I do not identify with the religion of Christianity and what is called church, but I rather identify with the followers of the way, and I also identify with ecclesia, because I understand what that means, and they absolutely represented that in the first century. And beyond the first century, they continued to represent that, at least those that continued in the way. They represented that for more than 15 centuries of martyrdom, but I want you to hear me when I say this, that it wasn't just the first century ecclesia that continued as followers of the way. They continued as followers of the way long after they were tagged as Christians, in order to mock them, in order to brand them, so that they would be further marginalized. And let me tell you what, the more they were marginalized and the more that they were ostracized, the more they began to band together as ecclesia and family and help one another. And that's the way it should be, and that's the way it will be again. At this point, I'm going to be totally honest with you. I don't want to sound jaded, but I have very little hope that that's going to happen if all hell broke loose, as we would say in the South, and if the caca hit the fan. I don't see that really happening, because we are way too independent. We are way too selfish at this point. But the day will come when that will change, when there will be great need, and we will see that as an opportunity to band together and bring what we have to the table in the way of gifts, talents, and abilities and strengths. And we will not just ride the wave or sandbag or take advantage of opportunities. We will really provide something. I want to leave that with you today and to think about those things. But
Home Family Gathering is a listener-supported ministry, and we appreciate your support. Apostolic Kingdom Alliance and Blake Higginbotham are supported by the generous contributions of friends and family. We are grateful for your continued support in the ongoing work of Apostolic/Kingdom Ministry. Thank you.